All right, guys. So I'm back in the garage of Awesomeness today. Gonna do some work on the 5th gen. I often get asked what I do and what I use when I paint underneath my trucks. Frame, axles, little stuff like that. Little stuff, right? But I keep it pretty simple, to be honest with you. Now, obviously, this one being a 2021, having 30-something thousand miles on it, the underside of the truck isn't really bad. It's been a Colorado truck all of its life, so don't really have to worry about salt and a lot of that stuff that's kind of on the East Coast or the Northeast. So it's not really in that bad a shape, but it does leave a bit to be desired. And with the lift kit being dropped off at Powder Coat this morning, I want to make sure that I get as much of it done before I throw the lift on, so that way it's basically ready to go with the first kind of big prep, paint, everything's done. So when I get the lift on there, everything looks as good as I can make it look. Obviously, I'm not going to be taking the axles off or stripping them down, powder coating the housings, anything like that. It's a daily driver, and honestly, I just don't have the resources for it right now, but that can change pretty soon too. So I'm going to show you real quick what I use personally and what I start off with to kind of get the surface prepped and cleaned up, and then what paint I use. I do have a couple different sizes of tape that I use as well to kind of tape things off, because again, I'm not stripping everything off the truck. The axle's staying on the truck. The most I'll be doing to this thing is basically taking the wheels and tires off when I do the front axle, and wheels and tires off when I do the rear. So I keep it pretty simple. So if you're kind of one of those that wants to do this stuff in your garage, maybe you've been intimidated by it, or maybe you just weren't sure where to start, I'm going to kind of walk you through that today, at least the way that I do it. Again, everyone probably has their own way of doing things. I know, you see some of these really cool big show trucks and Jeeps, and they got everything stripped off, down to the frame, which eventually someday I'd love the option to get to. But right now, plans are to keep it a little bit more simple. So let's start off with the basics. I usually go through a couple of bottles of this when I get a new truck or new to me truck or Jeep or whatnot, because I got to tell you, this stuff works pretty awesome. Okay. Now, I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I've used quite a few different types of degreasers, and honestly, this stuff works pretty well. So I'll usually start off at the car wash, obviously, using a bottle or two of this, depending on what I'm doing. So for example, this morning, I went through a bottle and a half of this on the rear axle, rear drive shaft, just kind of got up under the nooks and crannies of the truck from basically the cab back, and got it all sprayed down, let it sit for a little bit, washed everything off, and then did it again on the rear axle just to make sure. So that's the first round. Now, the second round usually involves some 100 to 300 grit sandpaper and a sanding block. Now, obviously the sanding block does make life a bit easier. So in some of the bigger broad areas on the axle, for example, real easy to get in there with this. Some of the smaller tight niche areas, obviously I'll just kind of, cut up the sandpaper, do it by hand, make sure that I get everything. But basically end to end, axle wise and top to bottom, I try to get as much of it at least roughed up as I can to give the paint a good porous surface to stick to. Once I get done sanding everything off, I'll go back to said car wash or somewhere to basically wash the truck and use more of this degreaser on it. The nice thing with this stuff too is that, they've got a couple different variations of it, but this kind, as far as using the foaming, lets me know that it's ready to rinse off when it's done kind of sitting on there. So that is round 2 of the degreaser. And then, give me 1 second, I'll be right back. I've got 2 different types of tape that I use, right? So obviously, I use a 3M Auto for some of the smaller areas, brake lines, things of that nature. I picked this up at O'Reilly's. I can't remember how much it was, but this stuff comes in clutch and it works very well. And then for some of the bigger areas, basically from, U-joint on the drive shaft forward, want to make sure I don't get any paint inside there, although I do have plans for that. And then obviously, the dust caps on the brakes, rotors, things of that nature, I get all that stuff taped off and squared away too. In the example of my 5th gen today, I'm not going to really be taping off the shocks or anything, or the coils, because they're coming off once I get once I get everything back from powder coat for the lift for this thing. I'm going to be replacing the rear coils on it and obviously replacing the shocks anyway. And the truck is getting some different diff covers on it that are also being powder coated. So I want to make sure that everything is as nice as I can get it to look in the garage well, kind of in my garage. I don't know if you guys can see. It's kind of in the garage, kind of outside my driveway, but it's a well-ventilated area. So that's obviously super important. And it's a little windy out, so we'll see how this goes. But anyway, so I've got some Scotch Blue tape that I use on the bigger areas, and obviously some of the 3M auto tape that I use on some of the smaller areas. This will be on like the brake lines, sensor lines, things like that. And then again, this will be on the end of the drive shaft, the dust covers, rotors, things like that. Because honestly, I don't want to get any paint on any of that stuff if I don't have to. So tape everything off. Now, the one thing I found with this is the more time that you spend in your prep work and taping everything off that you don't want to get painted or that can't get painted or that shouldn't get painted, the better the result. So basically what I'm going to do with this thing, I'm going to spend a bit more time taping everything off because I don't want the brake lines to have any kind of overspray on them. I want everything to look like basically brand new. Make it look as good as I can in my garage. Again, it's my daily driver. It's not a show truck, but I want it to look good because I have a little bit of OCD. So again, prep work is key. And then last but certainly not least, I've used this stuff for years. I love it because it's good for up to 500 degrees. It's super resistant to a lot of oils and greases and whatnot. And the finish, depending on how many coats you put on, which I usually do anywhere from 2 to 4, depending on where I'm spraying it, is awesome. And it holds up extremely well in the elements, at least up here between, salt, or not, I shouldn't say salt, but mag chloride. They put gravel on the roads in certain areas, snow, rain, and obviously me washing it off all the time. So I use a Duplicolor. Now this stuff is a low gloss, so it's kind of a satin, so it has a little bit of a sheen to it when the light hits it, but it's not a matte black and it's not a gloss black. Again, for me, this stuff works extremely well for what I'm trying to accomplish because it doesn't take, your eyes aren't going to really go right to it because it's glossy black, and you're not going to pass over it because it's a matte black. The actual paint itself is DE 1634. So I don't know if you guys and gals can see that. This stuff works great. I usually buy this stuff in 6 to 10 cans at a time because, again, I'm not doing just one coat. In fact, the rear axle on this thing will probably get 3 coats. The front axle on this thing will get 3 coats. So the truck may end up, after the 3rd coat, wheels and tires put on it, back it back out, let it sit outside. I'm supposed to have a few days of nice weather up here, 70 degrees, which will be perfect to let this stuff dry. And I won't wash it or do anything crazy or probably even drive the truck, honestly, for the next couple of days just to make sure that this stuff does its job. So that is basically what I do. That's all the stuff that I use. Again, that's on this truck. Now on my 2nd gen, obviously I'll be a little bit more detailed on that one because there's a couple spots on that truck that are going to require maybe a little more than just the 100 to 300 grit sandpaper. But again, that is for another video. I got to finish doing the rear main and that thing, as well as a new CCV setup on it and the Carli control arms later this week. So stay tuned for that. So I'm going to get this thing kind of stripped down. I'm going to get the wheels and tires taken off of it. I'll show you exactly what I tape off in the back of this truck. Again, I'm not afraid to spray the coils on this thing that are on it right now. I'm not afraid to spray the rear shocks on this thing. I'm not afraid to spray the diff cover on it because those are all going to be replaced with an aftermarket counterpart as well. So stay tuned. I'm going to get to work. All right, ladies and gents, so here is the final product. I got everything taped off and painted. Got it all taken care of. I think it turned out pretty good for just kind of doing this in my driveway, doing a little bit of prep work on it. Took the wheels and tires off just to make it a little bit easier, but it turned out pretty good. I mean, obviously I know that some of these nuts and bolts on the rear track bar will come off. I will end up probably doing something with that silver bracket once I replace the diff covers on this thing, but it cleaned up pretty good. And I gotta tell you, I mean, I got a couple hours into it as far as the prep work goes, but I mean, the rear axle, everything turned out pretty clean. One of the things that I was trying to focus on too was the rear diff, obviously, not just the backside, but the front from all the crud on the road kind of kicking up. So I'll be swapping out the rear control arms with some Stryker manufacturer ones and getting those powder coated to match in white as well. But everything's painted, everything turned out about as good as I could have hoped. So there was one little spot that I had an issue with. Heading around over here to the driver's side. And I may end up sanding it down and or scuffing it up and just kind of smoothing it out and putting another coat on there, but everything turned out pretty good. I mean, I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. I was able to move the breather tube out of there. Again, got all the lines and everything taped off all the way up to the back of the dust plate on the rotors. But yeah, not too shabby for just doing it in my driveway. And obviously compared to how it looked before, right? I don't know if you guys and gals remember the last video of me installing the exhaust on this thing, but definitely left a bit to be desired. So, but this is the final product. And I may end up just swapping all these out for some zinc coated hardware as time progresses. But yeah, that is the final product, ladies and gentlemen. There it is, all done.